Sorry. Hello, hello. Welcome. Welcome to ACES Masterclass 2. My name is June Kangula. I am the Partnership Engagement Support at ACES, and also for SBAN, I am the project lead. And we're glad to see you join us for this masterclass, the second in the series, also 5 leading to the summit. And today, we're going to have this masterclass focusing on unlocking potential in underrepresented markets. I do not want to expound more on that because we do have a compelling panel that will speak more on that. But just to walk you through the agenda, what the session will look like. So first, what to expect for ACES 2024. We have a lot planned, and we look forward to seeing all of you at the end of the year in Cape Town. And then now the roundtable discussion, announcements, and closing. This will be just a quick conversation, hot and sweet. Short and sweet, yeah. Short and sweet, just so that you can see what you can get during the ACES 2024. Feel free to jump in the conversation, ask questions on the chat. Let us know where you're connecting. If you can share your LinkedIn profile with us so that we can have a community of ACES guys, that would be great. Feel free to post on socials using hashtag ACES 2024. And just to invite Ayanda. Ayanda has so much in store for us to walk us through what to expect for ACES 2024. Ayanda, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the continent you're joining us from. My part is short and sweet, as June would say. I'm here just to kind of set the scene, and then I will hand it over to our moderator to drive the conversation. So I am the stewardess of the conversation. We can call it that, and the conversation pilots will come in a few minutes. But just for those of you who may be new to ACES, just to give you a bit of an overview in terms of what you can expect this year and what the level of engagement that is available this year. So first of all, I've got a bit of a roadmap here for you just to make things easy. There are multiple touch points with which you can get involved with ACES. The first being this platform that we are on. We have a virtual masterclass happening once a month leading up to the summit for 6 months. This is our second one. It's called the ACES Academy. And this is part where we pull together some experienced investors to share a little bit about the community of practice, a little bit about not technical knowledge sharing, but also in terms of resources and unpacking some of the core experiences that add to the conversation. Second of all, it's investor-related partner events. If you have investor-facing or investor-involving activities in your programs this year or with your investor organizations, let us know. We're this year dedicated to making sure that the communities are connected outside of just the virtual conversations or just the in-person summits, but also throughout the year where the opportunity presents. So that is an opportunity that exists. Third is our investor meetups. We'll go into these a bit more. If you don't know about our investor meetups, about a month before we all gather in one location, we gather in multiple locations. This year, we're hoping for it to be 40. There is a 3-week window for which that you can choose to attend an event close to you. Between the 30th of September and the 19th of October, these will be happening in 40 locations. Across the continent and in some parts of the globe. So we're super excited about that. And then lastly, it's the annual summit, right? This little QR code over here gets you the tickets so that you can get your early bird ticket now and join us in Cape Town at the end of the year. So the annual summit last year was attended by over 350 delegates from over 25 different countries. So it's a gathering of early stage investors, from angels to VCs to LPs as well, DFIs, generally a conversation space, learning space, and a connection space where a number of activities are happening this year. So again, I'll point you to the QR code if you don't have it, but also africainvestorsummit.com to get your early bird tickets if you haven't yet booked your seat for the conversation for this year. So as we're kicking off this conversation, we thought to start this session a little bit differently. When we're talking about underrepresented communities, we thought to actually, here's the slide about getting your VIP access, buy your ticket, early bird tickets. The early bird ticket special is only available until the end of the month. So if you would like a really good deal on a ticket, make sure you book that now. And you'll hopefully also get some access to our discount codes on accommodation specials. Accommodation is first come, first serve in Cape Town. So please, the sooner you buy your ticket, the sooner you can get access to that accommodation discount codes that we have prepared for you. Okay, so a bit of a quiz. We are talking about underrepresented communities. And so I think I just wanted to test the knowledge of the room. Put your answers in the chat. But question number one. With Kenya being in first place with $244 million already raised this in the first half of 2024, which country do you think has come in second so far? Which country do you think has come in second? Let me see the answers. We're talking East Africa. Hey, I'm seeing South Africa, Nigeria, East Africa, with Kenya being in first place in East Africa. Which country do you think is in second place? Okay, I'm seeing Uganda. I'm seeing Egypt. Wow, okay. No, not South Africa. It's not in East Africa. Talking East Africa. Kenya is number one, 244 million raised thus far by startups in H1 of 2024. Okay, Uganda and Tanzania are coming up as the favorites. Let's see, Tanzania. Okay. The answer is Uganda, with $19 million raised this side of 2024 so far. So Tanzania is actually a close third. So the people who guessed Uganda and Tanzania weren't too far off as far as which are the emerging markets and the performing well in East Africa. So let's switch it up then and go to the other side of the continent. West Africa, as we know, Nigeria is number one, with funding having been raised this year, 172 million so far, H1 of 2024. Which country do we believe has come in second? Okay, Senegal is the first guess I'm seeing in there. Ghana or Senegal, okay. The favorites are favoriting. Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, all right. Senegal seems to be in the win in Ghana, okay. Seems to be a bit of a tie here. Let's see, I'll give it 5 more seconds. Which country has placed second in funding raised in H1 so far in West Africa? Ghana seems to be the popular favorite. Okay, and the answer is Benin. The answer is Benin. Benin is the country with $15 million recorded so far. That with Ghana as a close third and Senegal as a close fourth, though. But again, these are H1 results, right? H1 results. So let's see what the data will tell us at the end of the year. Okay, let's go to the third question. This is a relatively easy one. This stat has been on LinkedIn for about 3 weeks right now. Of the share raised by African startups since 2019, what is the percentage that has been raised by the rest of Africa? So Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya and South Africa as the big four, we know probably have raised the most, right? If we took aside what has been raised by the rest of Africa in comparison, is it 80-20? Is it 90-10? Is it 60-40? What is the percentage that the rest of Africa has raised? Someone said 20, 10, 25, rest of Africa, okay. Let's see, let's give it 3 more answers. Is it 60-40? Is it, okay, 20%, around 30%? Okay. The real answer is 17%. 83% of the funding raised on the continent has gone to the Big Four, and 17% has gone to the rest of Africa. And this is why you see us having conversations about capital mobilization and investment mobilization and talking about the underrepresented markets, right? We need to increase that number. We need to increase the money going to these sections. Okay, almost done. So now if we look at sectors that have raised the most amount, with fintech being the sector that has raised 186 million in second place, and energy and water being in third place. Which sector has raised the most amount of funding in H1 of 2024? Which sector? Someone said mobility. Okay. Mobility and transportation, health tech, ed tech. Which sector has raised the most so far? See some fintech, but fintech is already there as number 2. Okay, education, health tech, mobility, ed tech. Angels. Yes, I hope the angels have raised money too. Agriculture, mobility. Okay, let's get to it. The sector that has raised the most is logistics and transport in the first half of the year. Logistics and transport has beat out fintech as the sector that has raised the most amounts of funding the first half of the year. Okay. So lastly, bonus question before I let you go into the conversation. Which island nation will be hosting an investor meetup for the first time this year? I'll give you a clue because this is a really easy one. First of all, we only have 6 island nations. We have 6 African island nations on the continent, 6. And there's one that is going to be hosting an investor meetup for the first time. This island is made out of 3 islands, this island nation. Okay, some of the official languages are French and Arabic. It is the 3rd smallest African country by area. Which country am I talking about? Which country? Let's see the guesses. Which country am I talking about? Which country am I talking about? Okay, there's some Comoros here. There's some Comoros here. Cape Verde. Okay. Cape Verde is coming through. Oh, Cape Verde is coming through as a winner all of a sudden. Okay, which there are only 6 island nations. It could only be one of 6. Okay, perfect. The ones who said Comoros are right. Comoros will be hosting the very first investor meetup this year on the 5th of October. Just to touch on investor meetups, like I said, if you are keen to attend any, registrations open soon. We have 34 of the 40 countries fully registered and ready to release their dates. So if you are hoping to partner up or sponsor an investor meetup happening in a city near you, please reach out to our investor meetups lead, phil@africainvestorsummit.com. If you're wanting to be a part of it, whether it is co-host or you're just wanting to sponsor it because you have something to talk about, then all good. But that is me. Now I will properly hand over to Jason, who's going to lead the conversation for the rest of the hour and unpack with our guest speakers the conversation that we're here for. But thank you. I'll be back at the end just to wrap up in terms of other announcements that we may have. But thanks, guys, and enjoy the conversation. Remember to engage in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Ayanda. And yeah, great intro. Some really interesting topics raised there. And yeah, I think we all know the investment space, but myself included, some surprises there. So really good to see you, and thanks for that. Yep, as Ayanda mentioned, my name is Jason Delorie. So I'm a senior project manager at VC4A. And today, you know, I have a personal passion for the topic that we're looking at with unlocking potential in underrepresented markets. As an entrepreneur myself, I know the challenges that can be faced in these markets and the difficulties. But before we maybe jump in and speak about our amazing guest, I just maybe wanted to know from the audience, why do you think this topic is so crucial, particularly for investors? You know, what can we gain from these discussions? What do you think is the end result that we're looking for? And as Ayanda mentioned, please feel free to use the chat and jump in. no answer. So we're just here for the good vibes from Miranda. Diversity, yeah, I agree. I think that is really important and becoming more and more important in the investment scene. Any other thoughts? I think one of the key words that's constantly used to describe Africa is potential. I mean, we look at those stats given and 83% going to 4 markets. That leaves so the remaining amount of the countries potential being untapped. And I think this is key for not only on terms of the countries themselves to grow, but also in terms of the potential returns for investment. So I think it's a great topic. Really pleased to be part of it. And I'm even more pleased and privileged to have our guest speakers with us today. Today, we have the pleasure of having Rodrique Msechu, who is the founder of Serengeti Angels. And as well as we have Kristin Wilson, who is recently became the Innovation Africa Fund Director, and pleasure to have them both with us. Before we jump into the discussion, maybe a quick word from both of you to introduce yourselves to the audience. And I know some of them may already know you, but yeah, just a quick bit of background. Maybe jump to you, Kristin, first.
Awesome, thanks. So hi, everyone. I'm Kristin Wilson. And I, like Jason said, I'm the founder and managing director of the Innovate Africa Fund. That is an angel investment, early stage investing vehicle that invests across the continent. We're sector agnostic, recently launched. Prior to that, I founded the Bold Angel Fund, which also operates across the continent, but also looks specifically at the diaspora. And that was also an angel fund. My primary hat, however, is as a founder as well. So I launched a HR tech startup that supports founders with people operations technology, and we operate today in about 18 countries across the continent and globally. Good to be here.
Awesome. So good to have you. Thank you. And yourself, Msechu?
Yes, thanks, Jason, for having me. I'm pretty excited to have this conversation. My name is Rodrique Msechu, based out of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I am the founder and one of the partners at Serengeti Business Angels Network. We've been operating the past 3 years, and what we are doing with all our efforts is to back promising founders primarily in Tanzania, but also to link them up with more capital. Happy to share more insights later in the conversation.
Great, and thanks for being here to the both of you. It is a pleasure. So maybe to dive into the conversation and jump into the topic. Msechu, you mentioned your work in Tanzania, and maybe you could give us a bit more of an understanding of what defines this market, and if you would class it as underrepresented.
Well, it's interesting. I'm hesitant to agree that it's underrepresented. I agree it's underfunded. It doesn't get enough attention. But just to probably add on to the exciting session that Ayanda took us through, out of the big four, which represent a huge chunk of money coming into Africa, if you look at, there is about 11 countries that represent 70% of the GDP of Africa. So if you remove the big four, there is 7 others. Do we know them? Obviously, Tanzania is there, but please type on the chat. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, yes, I agree, Brian. So we are left with...
Any other thoughts?
Morocco, yes, for sure. Senegal, yes. Tunisia, unfortunately, is not there. Benin is not there, and Egypt is one of the big four. But I see people are switched on. So Morocco, Ghana, Uganda, Tanzania, and from Francophone Africa, we have Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, and Senegal, which means now this is the second tier of markets that could really produce promising founders if they're given more support and more attention. So why is Tanzania interesting? One, because if you look at the size of Tanzania, you can fit Kenya and Uganda and still you have some change in terms of size. But we are strategically located. So out of the 8 neighbors we have, 6 of them are landlocked, which means countries like Malawi, Zambia would use our ports. And so there's a huge potential for startups that are innovating. For example, I just saw the logistics has received a lot of funding, and I wouldn't be surprised none of the logistic tech companies in Tanzania has received that. But I mean, you can tell that's a huge market that could be explored because all these goods come from our ports to Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, Zambia, Malawi. But
that's really
sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, another thing that makes our market very interesting is the fact that at the moment we have a very conducive, maybe not conducive, but listening government. So we see a lot of efforts of government entities and institutions reaching out, which is a good starting point to have a conversation on how do we come up with a startup act, how do we create an environment where we can have more money coming into the country. But we've also heard from one of our ministers mentioning that very soon we'll have a national fund funded by the government to tech startups. So all these conversations are happening at the moment. That makes it super interesting for us in Tanzania. Then in terms of the development partners, we see a lot of interest in supporting the ecosystem. So you have the likes of UNDP funding the Funguo program, which incubates startups and funds them partially. But you have institutions like CRDB, our biggest bank, rolling out the Msechu loan, which just goes into unlocking more and more access to finance for our startups. Yeah, and Stanbic to mention but a few. And the reason I'm mentioning them is because this hasn't been the case for a long time. This is maybe the past 3 years. That's when we are seeing more and more of these trends. And yeah, also some international venture firms that are looking into the space. I have to mention, Jason, I'm sure you're very much aware of the Develop program by the German Ministry of Economic Development that has run a few cohorts in Tanzania, giving $100,000, 100,000 euros in grants to our startups. So I'll pause there and give it back to you, Jason.
Yeah, that's fantastic and really interesting. I think one thing that strikes me there is how you don't see yourself as underrepresented, whereas a lot of rhetoric around Tanzania is that notion that they are underrepresented. Really interesting. Maybe jumping across the side of the continent. Historically, again, we see Francophone Africa being considered one of those regions that are underrepresented. I mean, would you push back on this, Kristin, or do you feel differently? Yeah, interesting to find out what you think.
Yeah, no, I actually really enjoy the distinction that Rodrique is making between underfunded and underrepresented. I actually think it's a very exciting and useful one, because the idea is that there are founders, so whenever I'm attending, part of our strategy with the fund is really sort of like boots on the ground, going into these cities, not just principal cities, but also second tier cities, meeting founders. And you do realize there is a lot of activity. I think this idea of underrepresented is a function of market size and market opportunity. But I think even some of those dynamics are changing, right? So even when we think about the way that we're looking at deals and we're looking at who may or may not be a fit for our portfolio, we're actually starting to look at it from the point of view of not just specific countries, big tier cities, but actually owning regions, right? So dominating, West Africa, or at least bridging multiple borders. And so I think that question of country A versus country B, at least for us, is going to become less and less relevant as we look more at who's able to cut across multiple regions. If you're operating in the Francophone region, are you capturing Benin, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal in interesting ways? Are you bridging opportunity across ECOWAS, across the East African community? So yeah, I'm aligned with that distinction. I do think there is still some underrepresentation from founders in these conversations. However, I mean, from these markets in these conversations, and so I do think that needs to be attended to, because I also think that this idea, if you look at the last couple of years, sitting in the VC space, there's issues around pipeline, there's urgency around diversification away from the big four. And I think that instinct means that this is actually a great opportunity to redress some of that underfunding, redress some of that, underrepresentation in critical conversations around what innovation looks like on the continent, and what the right sorts of exciting ventures could look like, right? What's the profile? What's the archetype of founders that we should be backing, particularly at the early stages? So I am very excited for the contributions that some of these, what we call second tier markets, are already bringing to our investment conversations.
Thanks for that. And I think, 2 points there that I really enjoy is that regional approach as well, and that aspect. And then the other one, which I think is another interesting point, and is sometimes, it can be, a make or break situation, is that boots on the ground. I mean, how much do you think? I think sometimes investors or people looking at Francophone from an Anglophone aspect, they see the language and culture being a really big barrier to that type of engagement. I mean, how have you seen strategies to get around this? How has that been a barrier, or what has been your experience in overcoming that?
Right. So, I mean, I think I'm lucky in the sense that, at least for French and English, I am bilingual in that sense. And so, typically in places where I've worked with funds that I've worked with, I've provided context on both sides. I'm a member and active in both Anglophone and Francophone angel networks. But I think the challenge, certainly the language piece, but I think even beyond language is context, right? I think that even if I'm, sitting in Nigeria and I'm thinking about Cameroon, there's ways in which there's, cultural similarity, even if, it's a completely different country. And then of course it's English, so I can understand and pick up a lot more if I'm monolingual. Whereas if I'm looking at, Senegal or the Ivory Coast, and I can't even understand what's being said in the first place, and having to proceed via translation, I think it just makes it really hard to even grasp sometimes the depth of the opportunity. And I think this is especially critical at the early stages, right? I think in later stages you have things like numbers, you've got a product that's serving multiple customers, so it all starts to kind of make sense to you, right? It's translatable in some way. But I think in those early stages, where really the nuances are what are going to allow you to figure out who's a winner versus not, that language barrier can get in the way. But I think this is really where partnership, this is where networks, things like ACES and ABAN can be really useful, because then you can rely on the expertise of those who are local, the expertise of those who speak the language, and just have those, honest and humble conversations. I think one of the great things about being an angel investor actually is that you don't have to posture like a VC. You don't have to pretend like you know everything. And so that actually allows you to just, to ask the questions, to say, I don't understand this. I don't quite understand how this market works, or I don't understand why this is an opportunity. I remember a conversation with some founders that an analyst was sitting in on operating in Egypt, and they were talking about, you know, how exciting and interesting it was that they were able to, you know, do what was in effect mobile money. And she was like, why is that exceptional? Like, why is that interesting, right? And I think the comfort to be able to ask that question, to say, okay, why is being able to send money the way that Ghanaians have been doing for the last 20 years an exciting and new and, you know, breathtaking opportunity in a market like Egypt. And I think conversations like this and networks like this facilitate the sort of like the comfort to ask those questions, right? To go and seek out those answers, and then also compensate for some of the barriers around language. But not, I think it's even more than just language, also context, right?
Yeah. I think that's so key, and I really like that, you know, that local context that you raised. You know, having that understanding of the nuances in the local market, I think is so key, especially with people who maybe are not so knowledgeable. And I think, Msechu, you also face this in Tanzania, where some investors may not have that cultural nuance, and even within Tanzania, there's different, you know, Dar es Salaam being the main hub, but there are differences within that. What strategies have you seen that have been effective in really attracting international investors? You know, you mentioned some other you know, DFIs like DG and the Develop program, but I mean, what has your experience been with attracting these foreign eyes to invest in Tanzania?
Yes, thanks, Jason. I think for us, before we started Serengeti Angels, we came in with a hypothesis that if we have skin in the game and we are local, it makes it easier for those who are not locally based to be able to join the investment with us. And so that's the premise of us coming together and getting friends who want to risk some of their money and then doing our very first deal. But thing is, you start and then you get more support on the way. So we were lucky that once we did our first deal, SBAN was there to match that investment. It was about 22K. And so the startup got 50K of grant money, and that already pushed the needle. But we realized that we have to grow. We have to grow our network, and this asset class is not easy to understand. So the best way is to run master classes, and so it was very important when we got some support from UNCDF to run what we call the Tanzania Angel Accelerator, which basically brings in the know-how that we have as local investors, and bringing in those who are curious about the asset class, asking them to commit at least $1,000, right? And then hand-holding them through the investment process. At the end of it, they have to invest, or rather they forfeit 80% of what they gave us. So we did that as an experiment. It worked very well. And I mean, when you have skin in the game, you were very attentive. So they were very switched on. They loved what they were learning. They found it interesting. And after closing the first deal, they were looking for other deals to do. But what we also did was to pair that experiment of training angel investors locally with a feasibility study that you can actually access and download for free on our website, called the Tanzania Angel Investors Training Feasibility Study. So how feasible is it to train these individuals to become angel investors? And so what we have is actually, first we have the market size. We know prospectively there are about 120 individuals that could become angel investors this coming year. And we know out of those, only about 30% are high net worth individuals. So a huge chunk goes to those who are in the corporate space or about to transition or are thinking of starting a startup, and they have $2,000 to $5,000 to invest. So that came out of it. But to circle back so that I don't go on a tangent, Jason, what we've realized is Dar es Salaam is overrepresented, 60% of the market. But places like Mbeya, Arusha, Zanzibar, where there is huge potential, there is just a need for us to do more work there. And so now we understand the market. I think 10% is in Arusha, Mwanza, and the rest of Tanzania about 5%. But the diaspora is a huge chunk for us. It's 15%. And so you will see a lot of effort from SBAN to reach out to Tanzanians in the diaspora.
That's really interesting and fantastic, and maybe just circling back on some of what you mentioned there. I think that skin in the game aspect, it breeds confidence with other external investors and international investors, knowing that the on the ground people are also backing this, and maybe it's at different levels, but at the same time it is as you say, skin in the game breeds that confidence. I really do like that use of case studies and increasing that visibility to external investors as well. I think that's also a key aspect. I wonder, I mean, have you seen any other examples of this working through that, through investors approaching you, or international investors approaching you through some of that visibility that you're putting out?
Yes. What I'm seeing, and it's very unique at this moment in time, where I think every 2 weeks I'm in a conversation with an early stage investor who has either come into the country to do due diligence, or they're thinking of co-investing, or they want to speak to our angel network. So we see a ripple effect. But I would say the study has helped, but there's other things that are coming into play. One being we have other tools like the podcast, where we talk about angel investment, but we are trying as much as possible to connect it to the local environment, because what we realize is that the local audience will feel that's something that's done somewhere else in a mature market, but it's not for us in Tanzania. So that tool has helped to put in some visibility. But other initiatives like the Harambee Evening really helps to put more spotlight on the pipeline. And just to take a few seconds to explain this, we have a night where we have 3 startups that are pitching, and we reach out to corporates to come in as the audience. They have to pay about 20,000 shillings. So that's roughly $8-9 to be admitted. And then the evening is about the startups doing a deep dive into one aspect of their business. So it's not the typical pitching, and they would get feedback and thoughts from the audience. And then all the get collection would go to one of the startups that we vote for. So when we started out, we were not sure if there was going to be reception from just the corporate space, but we've done 3 of them, and every time we have more than 40 people coming in. So that's one initiative. But another thing that is working for us is the spirit of collaboration. So we are one angel network, but we have Warioba Ventures that is also actively investing in Tanzania, and we exchange notes very frequently. We support each other, because we know that it takes the village, and for us to have more deals and good deals, we need to work together.
Awesome, thanks for that. Yeah, really interesting, and glad to see the success of some of those initiatives coming to fruition, and also in getting more momentum in that space. I wonder how has this been something that's been mirrored in terms of the effectiveness of the use of visibility in the francophone environments or ecosystems, or have you seen other approaches being used, Kristin, or any other examples that you could give us of how they are looking to attract more attention, visibility, and investment?
Yeah, no, I think having these events, these gatherings that bring folks, not just local players from the ecosystem, but also folks in other markets, are certainly very, very effective. I imagine that a number of people here are actually familiar with the Big Angels Day that DNA has been organizing. So I think the first edition happened last year I think it was in Dakar, and then the next one's happening again this year. I want to say in October. And I mean, last year was very exciting. Lots of startups from across Francophone Africa, smaller markets, bigger markets, the event was actually curated in a really interesting way. It didn't just feature the founders pitching, but also some reverse pitching from VCs and angels. And I believe that it's coming back this year as well. And I imagine it'll be even bigger and better. But I think convenings of that sort, gatherings like that, have definitely been useful for exposing these ventures to investors from outside of those markets, as well as even from outside of the continent. And I think that there's useful work also being done with cross collaboration as well. So for instance, We Capital actually just organized an event with M Studio, which is a venture studio in Abidjan, I want to say. Also just trying to understand a little bit more about what's happening in the ecosystem, and getting to know founders operating there a little bit. Prior to that, at We Capital, we had done a few deals in Francophone Africa. Part of the work that I did with We Capital as well was also exposing us a bit more to what was happening in the Ghana ecosystem, and getting to know some of the players there. With the Bold Angel Fund, actually, we initially started off in Nigeria, but actually eventually moved the primary base of the fund to Ghana, to kind of focus on these secondary markets, because one of the things that we realized was that really finding some of those really rich and promising early stage deals would be done better from these secondary cities who already, because one of the interesting things about some of these founders operating from these markets is that they're already thinking regionally, right? They're already thinking about de-risking. They're already thinking about what collaboration could look like, so that they can actually unlock scale. And I think that sometimes when you're in a large market, you don't have those same instincts, because you think, well, there's allegedly 200 million people that I could potentially figure out how to unlock this market too. And that can sometimes create challenges. I mean, even for some of the later stage deals that I've been involved with, sometimes unlocking, higher valuation has actually been a function of being, too concentrated in one market. And so, investors are like, hey, I don't think I want to pay more for this, because all of your risk is concentrated in one political ecosystem, in one currency, and so on and so forth. And so you see these, larger, later stage ventures who have come out of these big four markets now scrambling to figure out how to, diversify, so that they're actually more compelling, and they can attract higher valuations from investors. And sometimes maybe not waiting until you're too late in the game and it's affecting your ability to attract more competitive valuation and investment offerings is a better idea.
That's so true, and I think there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of learnings. I think both on both the market and looking at it as a regional, I think can also be a huge a huge benefit to some of these smaller markets. But even so, within, I mean, we look at Msechu in Tanzania, and that market itself having a very, like as mentioned, urban versus rural, a very large chunk of it coming from one of the cities within that country. I wonder, with these different types of investments across the continent, do we have a different, let's say, whether it's more SME plus kind of companies rather than full tech startup kind of companies? And is there a need to have some sort of investor education or understanding of what type of investments they're going into? in fact, either of you, it would be great to hear both of your perspectives on that one.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, at least, personally as an angel investor, but also with, the Bold Angel Fund, and now with, Innovate Africa, we're by no means limiting ourselves to this idea of, the startup on the VC track, right? For us, exits can come in different ways. They might come through PE, they might come through, strategic mergers and acquisitions. And then they might also come through, the VC route, for us, maybe exiting at Series A or Series B, less likely. But the idea is that we're looking at ventures that have, really innovative products and have high high potential for transformational impact. That really is the criteria, rather than say, do you look like a startup? Do you mimic something in Silicon Valley? Do you have customers, right? Are you serving real businesses on a consistent basis? Is there scale that can be unlocked for you? Those are the questions that we're asking, right? Because technology is a tool, it is a lever, and it can be applied strategically, regardless of whether something looks like an SME or looks like a startup. And in fact, one of the things that I've noticed investing over the last 10 to 12 years, especially with the boom in 2021, is that you do see, we have seen a lot of these ventures, come, maybe because they were naive about the market. Maybe there was just a lot of, excitement in the boom, but they present a really exciting and, technology-driven proposition. And then, they raise a lot of money late 2020, 2021, and then you peer under the hood in 2023, and it's essentially a services company struggling to, meet the promise of its lofty valuation a la 2021. So you invest in a startup today, and then 2 years later, you find out you're sitting on an SME, or you invest in an SME today and you turn it into something that, has high propulsion. I think at the early stages, it's probably not a good idea to be a purist, but more important to actually pay attention and be on the lookout for those things that can unlock value at scale, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, amazing. I really like that. And then maybe yourself, Msechu, what's your view on this?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So for me, I think access to finance is a huge problem in the continent in general and in Tanzania in particular. And the traditional SMEs are struggling to get this financing, and those who normally fund, I'm talking about the banks, have not been able to cater or have products that cater for the traditional SMEs. So where I think there is more potential is, and I agree with Kristin, is not being focused only on tech-enabled startups, but looking at how these traditional SMEs could, one, could give good returns, but two, how could they define their sustainability? And that's what we are finding out. It's most of them are impact driven, but they don't have the tools to measure impact and sustainability. So just helping them to be able to do that already unlocks another avenue of being funded by impact investors and the like. So if you look at blue economy right now, is an area where there is more money coming in, or climate tech. But those SMEs playing in that sector, if they are mentored and guided, they could unlock more financing and probably more value for their shareholders.
So true. Yeah, I think that's a key point to raise, and I really believe more could be done in that regard. Interesting. I know we don't have too long left, but maybe just one or two more questions. I also think there's maybe this is a mental blocker or untruth, but I think there's also a bit of resistance in terms of having clear visibility on the ground for data and being able to know the market well when international investors are looking at such markets and such companies like the SMEs that may need different types of support. Do you think that plays a really big problem in terms of that data availability for these types of markets?
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump to you, Msechu. Yeah, like in terms of, I don't think it's as well documented in terms of, the different elements that you look for when being external and not actually being on the ground.
Yeah. So I think in a market like ours, it's very opaque. There is not enough data to know who is doing what, but also things like credit scoring. You don't know if someone is taking a loan here and is going to run away with your money, but also experiences from investors who came in earlier on and got their fingers burnt. And so once bitten, twice shy, that makes it a big opportunity for those who would like to invest in Tanzania to have skin in the game. So I'm making a case again for Serengeti angels and angel investors. But what I've seen is if you want to invest, and this is very early on, you don't have enough numbers in a startup, and you want to invest and you're not locally based and not using local resources, what ends up happening is sometimes you distort the market or you set expectations wrong for the founder. I've met, for example, a founder who values his startup 3 times what I feel is the market rate, just because one venture capital firm that has a strategy of spraying and praying did a deal in Tanzania, right? And overvalued it, and I feel like they don't care. But here now you have a founder who is stuck. He really thinks that his valuation is up there, it should be less, and he can't get help. And when he goes back to the VC, they tell him, no, you have to get a better deal in this. So it's such things that we also see.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And like you say, it can also have adverse effect investment in the country. You think always a good thing, but it has to be done in the right way. And I think, I'll back you with that collaboration mentioned again. I think that is a key aspect. And maybe I think, we are approaching the end, and maybe we'll take one final question. This one I'm actually drawing on our audience, Dr. Bernadette here. What lessons can we learn from the Big Four? At one point, they also were underrepresented markets and things like that. So maybe as the final question, what do you think we can learn from these markets? What do you think they did well, and how can other emulate their success?
That's for me.
Maybe. Actually, I'd like to get a quick one from both of you just to close.
Okay, I can start. Some of the things that I feel in a market like Kenya you get, and Tanzania or underrepresented markets or underfunded markets could learn from is one, availability of talent. So either talent that is locally grown, or the ability to import or get someone to have a work permit from outside. I think it's very difficult in Tanzania, and that really makes it hard for the startups that want to scale here to have the right team. Right. And I know in Kenya at some point there was a conversation between white funded founders versus the locals, but I feel like that's the next step of the conversation. You have to have things happening for you to be able to have that conversation. In Tanzania, it's extra hard to get talent. And then the other thing is last one. Yeah.
Last one. Go for it.
Yeah, I think we need to collaborate, especially with the likes of government and different institutions, because when we are making the laws, is for us to be able to pay more taxes to help our country. So that conversation has to be approached in that way rather than antagonistic, where we want to lock you out or you guys are not ethical, etc., etc. So over to you, Jason.
Fantastic. Well, over to you, Kristin. What's your view? What are the maybe one or two key points that we could learn from these markets?
Absolutely. I do love the point that Rodrique made around sort of policy and regulatory support. I think that, you know, as a regulator or policymaker or even an ecosystem builder enabler in some of these tier 2 markets, you've kind of seen, you know, you've seen what's happened with crypto, you've seen what's happened with, you know, angel investment, you've seen what's happened with, you know, sandboxes and, you know, enabling mobility. So there's just lessons that can be learned there for better policy, making your market more agile, easier to move into. I think that's actually one of the things that Ghana is trying to do, is sort of looking critically at what, you know, the CBN is doing, and then BOG is sort of saying, okay, what would work in Ghana and what would be a little bit different. And then I think this point around talent is such a headache. I think one of the biggest challenges, and I say this because I sit on the founder side as well, and we've, you know, we scaled into a number of different markets, is, you know, just having to sometimes feel like you have to move your talent with you, because folks are just not operating at the same level. They're not thinking, you know, about things competitively from the basis of like an international market with, you know, pressures. And so you're having to do all of this kind of like orientation around just how to, even when you're hiring, how to get people thinking on the same wavelength. So I think certainly that there's lessons around for folks playing in those ecosystems. How do you really upskill that talent? How do you make that talent you know, attractive? How do you make it possible for that talent to be retained from some of these entrants? But I think the other thing as well is, you know, building stronger ecosystems, which could look like regional hubs, right? More regional hubs. We have a lot of city hubs and country hubs, but I think regional hubs could definitely be, you know, something that we probably need to be considering a lot more strongly. And then in terms of like the ecosystems, making sure that these local players are well networked with the key members of the ecosystem. So if you think about not just the policy side, but also the capital access and delivery side, as well as the, you know, the talent side, the universities. One of the things that I found, you know, scaling into some of these markets is that the universities are really interesting and exciting places, sources of talent, but also sources of innovation. And so I think, especially for those markets, bringing those universities quicker and earlier into the fold and into the innovation ecosystems could really unlock some really interesting things.
Great, thank you. I think some great insights there, and a really a big thanks to both of you. Been a great conversation, and some of my key takeaways. I think one of the underlying themes is that collaboration, and I think it underpins in terms of just in, you know, having that skin in the game, as you say it, and collaborating internally with externally, but more as an ecosystem collaboration and having you know, the policies and government involved. I think it takes a village, as they say, and I think that's a key aspect of how we you know, accelerate these ecosystems. Another element, I think, is that key distinction between underrepresented and underfunded. I think that is something that you know, it has been, you know, opening in my thoughts on the subject. And I know we don't have enough time, but I also really love the point about the hub and talent. And I think Kigali has been a good example of how leveraging this kind of approach to foster the local ecosystem. But I just wanted to say thank you so much again, both speakers, Rodrigue and Kristin, and also to the audience. It's been a pleasure. And I will now hand over back to Ayanda, who I'm sure has a few words of wisdom for us leaving.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. As promised, we promised to keep it short and sweet, but super powerful. So we hope you made a lot of notes. There's a lot that was shared between Jason, Kristin, and Rodrique. So please make sure you take notes of those resources. I think a very powerful point as part of these sessions is to make sure that you get access. When I share that stat about Benin being second, people ask, what's happening in Benin? Go read the mid-year report that I got that stat from, right? What's happening with Bold Africa? What's happening with Innovate Africa? Follow Kristin. There's been a recent press release put out. And as Msechu said, they have a podcast that you can listen to if you want to get to understand who else is operating in Tanzania. And so this is the exact point of the session, to connect you. And on that point, I think you can connect with ACES, get involved with activities happening this year. There's a variety of ways to get involved this year. And we're super excited again to be bringing along people for those who want to be event partners. So event partners being, as Msechu said, be at the regional investor meetups, engage with the startups, engage with other investors, and kind of find out how you can collaborate in helping to kind of navigate some of the roadblocks that you may be facing. Get in touch with us if you want to be an investor partner, if you want to be a media partner and amplify some of the work that is being done, so these networks can move from the label of underrepresented and really be a part of the more broader conversations and bringing into your network what's happening in other network. And then I think lastly, ACES offers this year the opportunity for you to purchase a delegate package. So if you are missing the investor meetup, but you're also hoping to come to the summit for the ticket for which this QR code gets you to buy. But if you're not coming alone, if you're coming with members from your angel network, if you're coming with members from your ecosystem, reach out to us. And you can buy a delegate package for a group of 5 or more for those who will be coming to the November summit. And as mentioned, we've worked out some hotel deals, so hopefully book earlier rather than later. But thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our session drives. And like I said, if you'd like to get in contact with us, Encromel's details is on the screen. She is our partnerships lead, and myself, I'm the program director. If you have any further questions, the recording of this session will be made available. There were a lot of gems dropped, we realized, and we will link a lot of the resources mentioned throughout the session as well in our follow-up mailer. So yeah, I think I'll leave this up on the screen for a little longer, but other than that, thank you very much everyone for joining, and have a pleasant evening.
Yes, thanks.